When the ships of Christopher Columbus touched the shores of an unknown land, the native inhabitants looked at them in awe, as if something extraordinary had descended from the heavens. Sometimes their amazement was directed at the enormous ships, unlike anything they had seen before, and sometimes at the strange men who stepped ashore, two-legged like themselves, but clad in dazzling garments and carrying unfamiliar weapons. For the locals, every sight was new and bewildering. With innocent curiosity, they boarded the vessels without hesitation. They welcomed the newcomers with love and generosity, freely sharing food, gifts, and even the colorful parrots that filled their islands. They did not know for a long time that these sailors, led by Columbus, were not messengers of peace, but enemies of their freedom and their very lives. But how exactly did Columbus treat the lands he encountered, and why did he doubt Marco Polo's legendary tales? These questions lead us deeper into the story of the discovery of the New World. Far out in the ocean, scattered among the islands later known as the West Indies, lies a small piece of land called San Salvador. On the morning of October 12, 1492, the ships of Columbus anchored near this island. Only 21 kilometers long and 8 kilometers wide, it was then thickly forested, dotted with saltwater lakes and gentle hills. The native people called it Guanahani, a name inspired by the iguana, a lizard-like creature once common there but long extinct. Today, San Salvador is part of the Bahamas and remains sparsely inhabited. Back then, the story was very different. As Columbus's ships drew near, the islanders spotted them from afar and spread the news quickly. Excitement and wonder spread among the people, and soon they gathered along the shores to see the strange sight. Some swam through the waves, others clambered onto the ships with childlike innocence. To them, it felt as if heavenly beings had descended to earth. They had never seen vessels of such size or men dressed in rich colors. Their own lives were simple. They lived in small thatched huts, grew corn, and wore little clothing. Compared to their modest existence, the grand ships and foreign clothing of Columbus's men seemed like a miracle. When Columbus himself came ashore in a small boat, the locals greeted him warmly. He stayed only briefly on the land before returning to his ship anchored off the coast. Days later, he and his men set sail along the island's shores, gradually moving north. Everywhere they went, the people welcomed them joyfully, bringing food, drinks, and gifts. Among their offerings were brilliantly colored parrots, treasures of the island. Columbus and his crew in return handed out red hats and little bells. The islanders were astonished by the bells, laughing with delight as they rang in their hands. To the natives, it was a time of celebration. Yet in the mind of Columbus, another thought took root. These people, he observed, were kind and open-hearted, but they owned no grand palaces, no temples, and wore no proper clothing. Still, he noticed something that set his ambition aflame. Some wore ornaments in their noses that seemed to be pure gold. To him, this was no ordinary island. It had to be one of the places Marco Polo had written about, perhaps near the land of Chipangu, which Europeans knew as Japan. Like many Europeans of his age, Columbus had studied Marco Polo's accounts. Polo had described islands rich with gold near Chipangu, and Columbus had long dreamed of reaching them by sailing west. Convinced that he was close, he lingered only a short while on San Salvador, determined to move onward toward greater riches. But before setting sail again, he tried to gather as much gold as possible from the generous locals. It was surprisingly easy. Columbus wrote in his journal that the people of these islands owned no iron, steel, or weapons of war. They did not even know how to use such tools. To his mind, they were so defenseless that 50 men could subdue them completely and force them to do whatever was commanded. He marveled at their innocence, saying they would give anything asked of them without ever refusing. In truth, these people were unfamiliar with violence or the concept of private ownership. They welcomed Columbus and his men with open hearts, never suspecting the visitors' intentions. But Columbus and his companions took advantage of their kindness. They entered houses, rummaged through belongings, and searched for gold, while the natives still smiled and offered hospitality. After days of searching, Columbus realized that beyond a few earrings, no great stores of gold could be found. Determined to press onward toward Chipangu, he seized several of the islanders, forcing them aboard his ship. His plan was to teach them some of his language so they could serve as guides in future voyages. Believing they might lead him to Chipangu or China, as described by Marco Polo, he set sail once again. But these captives had never heard of such lands. They understood only that Columbus sought a great island, and they knew of one nearby. Guided by their words, Columbus's fleet soon reached a vast new land, the island we now know as Cuba. Convinced that he was on the threshold of Japan, Columbus pressed forward. When he stepped onto Cuban soil on October 28th, he found no gold. Still, he hoped he had arrived at Cathay, the fabled China described by Polo. For weeks, he searched for magnificent cities and golden palaces, but none were to be found. Gradually, the truth began to dawn on him. This was neither China nor Japan, and its riches were far fewer than he had imagined. Shaken by doubt, Columbus began to question Marco Polo's writings. Had the great traveler deceived them all with tales of endless gold? His disappointment grew, yet his hunger for discovery urged him onward.